welcome back to Full Throttle Moto. We took a season off, and look at what we found right down there. That's right, we found Miss Maddi Patterson. Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, DJ, and once again, why did it put me up here? We got to have Maddi up here, so that way, from right there, she can look to her left and see Kayla. There you go.
Perfect.
Anyway, welcome everybody. I'm your host DJ, but the important part of this joint is the two stars we have here: the Ray Hall Ducati Moto Super Sport competitor for this season, who just ran Daytona and finished in the 1-1 position, and of course we have MotoGP freelance journalist, the team principal of Sekhmet Racing International, which is going to debut this season under the MotoGP banner. And you also have a company, you do like brand strategy and marketing, is that right?
Yeah, so I run an agency called Phoenix PSP. So I'm busy.
Yeah. Yes, and if you'd read her Substack, you'll know why it's called that. Amazing is Maddi. So
it's
anyway,
a good story.
Yeah. Oh my God, I don't know if you've read it, Kayla. I damn near cried last weekend when I read an article that was written and they showed photos, something that I haven't seen, of Maddi's experience, and truly courageous comeback, not to be stopped. In fact, to rise even higher than she had planned. So, right?
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes, ma'am. All right, guys, welcome. We're coming off of, I thought, an apropos place to start, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is to talk about what happened at the Daytona 200, the first time that Kayla wasn't taken out by injury and was able to actually compete in this thing, because last year was set to be her debut there. And was it in practice you got hurt, Kayla?
No, so it was actually in testing the week before, less than a week before. We were testing at a track called Roebling, which is like, maybe 3 hours away. And it was the final day of testing and ended up crashing and not doing too well after that, and got hurt and wasn't able to race at Daytona.
Yep. We were just talking about your boy, Stefano Mesa. Go ahead. Did you have something, Maddi? Go ahead and jump
No,
in
I'm just
there.
saying, damn. Like, yeah. But Daytona will always be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'll get. It's Daytona's one of those places where if you want to go, you'll go. It's there. You're not gonna miss it.
Yeah, and honestly, like last year I would have only raced the twins, so it's not to say that I didn't miss much, but I didn't really miss much when you talk about the 200 and what people come to Daytona for. So,
yeah.
Which is more or less baggers now, but 200 is always there.
That's I actually had that outline, and our outline is the topic to talk about, is to get like Maddi's take and your take on the baggers, because on a previous episode when the baggers had leaked oil on the track, I think when you were at Road Atlanta, you were a little bit pissed off.
It was
but I think
because
was it Brainerd? Okay.
Yeah, it was they moved around the schedule, so like we had done the first half of the race in Junior Cup, and I was leading, and I actually had broken away. Like everyone knowing the Junior Cup classes like Moto3, World Super Sport 300, it is so hard to break away on those bikes. And I had finally broken away. I had probably like a 2-second gap, I think, which was a lot for especially that track. And it got to the point where I couldn't get drafted again on the back straight, which was huge. And then they red flagged it, and we go, and already I'm kind of upset because I'm like, I already bridged this gap, but I have really good pace right now. And if I, regroup, and I'll probably start from pole because I was starting from second, but during the restarts, you start where you end up finishing during the red flag. And I was like, if I start from pole and put my head down, I'll be able to hopefully break away again. And they actually ended up moving our race to later in the day and putting baggers in front of us, which was really crazy because it was in the middle of our race. And then they're just like, okay, baggers. And then the baggers ended up leaking oil and causing a delay. And then it was about to rain, and it got really hectic. Like everyone wasn't sure if it was going to be wet or dry. But yeah, it ended up working out. I think I ended up either winning that race or getting second. So it was still worked out, but yeah, it was a bit chaotic.
Sounds like a big weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was pretty famously. I know, Maddi, you're familiar with Attack Performance, Jake Gagne's team. Richard Stamboli basically roasted them on a Moto America podcast for leaking oil and sort of tuning the bikes to a degree that they had become unreliable and things like that were happening. And I'm from what I guess, because I'm just simply haven't heard anything. They've gotten a lot better, but we will get to baggers. I want to get to the Daytona 200. We're gonna come back to baggers because they are going to be part of the MotoGP weekend, which I suppose Maddi will be covering, and I will be there as well in Austin. So anyway, take us through it, Kayla, if you will.
Yeah. Daytona 200. It's as much as you want to watch the race and basically study it, it's never the same. So you kind of have to expect the unexpected and go into it thinking anything could happen. And that's basically what happened. Is just all weekend we were struggling because during testing we didn't necessarily have everything that we were going to have during our race. So from electronics to quick change stuff, that was all implemented after our test. So we kind of knew that we were going to have to go into Daytona and not worry about the results and just use it as a test. Because there are no points for Daytona when it comes to the super sport season. So, we're all racers. We want to win, but at the same time, we had to kind of step back from that and build our way up. But yeah, so first session was kind of hectic. First time at Daytona, especially on a middleweight bike, is definitely something crazy. And that track's not really a racetrack; it's a speedway, and it's bumpy. The paint is very, very slippery. You can tuck the front just going over the paint. The grip levels are not good. It's basically everything against the bikes, especially the Ducati.
Yeah.
So it was definitely different for us. And then on top of that, we were having a bunch of electronics issues. So our track time was very limited, especially compared to everyone else. And yeah, so first session we were like sat down in probably 28th, 29th, which was like, we knew it was going to be not great, but at the same time I'm sitting there like, man, I should have, we shouldn't be this far back. And it wasn't just me, obviously, like PJ and Corey were both in this kind of group in the back. And it was definitely frustrating, but we ended up figuring out slowly what things were going wrong. And we had Davide from Barney come out, and he was helping us all weekend, which was a huge, huge benefit because, obviously he knows the Ducati system that we're running inside and out. So that definitely helped a lot. But yeah, we ended up making some progress. Qualifying went all right. I wanted to get into the top 12, but we were still kind of restricted based on our electronics, which is something that we didn't really figure out until after qualifying. But yeah, I ran some really fast times on my own without any drafts, so I was really happy about that. And then going into the race, I was pretty confident. I knew we had a good package under us, and I'm qualified right behind two Yamahas that are full factory, and less than a tenth between us. So that definitely gave me a lot of confidence. And yeah, so we go out for our start, and on our sighting lap, I see one of the Triumphs, I believe it was Peter Hickman, spun up right over some of the paint hashes, which is pretty crazy to think about. I have Peter Hickman right in front of me. Nice. But he spins up on the hashes on the sighting lap, and I'm like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go right around him. Can't hit him because I'm going to spin up. And right off the start, go straight over the hashes, spin up, and do exactly what I didn't want to do. But ended up still making up a few positions on the start. Got shuffled back a little bit with some first lap chaos, but was still on the back of that front group, which was at the time, the first 3 laps was probably, I don't even know, like 20 riders. And we're all in this huge pack coming through the tri-oval, which is Ben Spees, who's obviously our team principal now, was like, that was probably one of the craziest things I've ever seen, is 20 super sport bikes coming through the tri-oval. But yeah, so like 3 laps in, bike just blows up right in front of me and Corey, and I forget who else. I think it was Danny Eslick.
Mhm.
And we're covered in fluid. And I'm like, oh, like this is bad. And we're going straight into turn 1, which is off of a 180-mile-an-hour banking. So it was definitely pretty sketchy. And I thought they were going to red flag it because there was so much fluid on all of us. And we get back onto the track, and like my shield is completely covered in fluid, and I'm like, I can't pull my tear off because you don't want to do it on the banking because you're going so fast, like your arms
Yeah.
just off. So you're like trying to figure out the best spots to do it. And there's this one spot after the first horseshoe where you're like up and down for maybe like 2 seconds. So I'm like sitting there trying to pull it, and it's not coming off. So I get like probably 8 laps where I can't really see. And obviously my windscreen is also covered in this fluid. So it was pretty sketchy, but it was still fun. And we ended up having to pit 3 times as opposed to everyone else's 2. So, which was, we kind of knew that because we had a smaller tank than there's 2 homologated tanks. We had the smaller one. And we kind of knew we were going to have to do a 3 pit stop strategy. So I was the first one into the pits. But yeah, relatively smooth after that. Had some fun battles with obviously my teammates, T. Cobbs, who runs the M4 Suzuki, Danny Eslick, and yeah, also Ben Young, who's Canadian Superbike champion. So it was really cool, and ended up finishing pretty well, P11. Obviously, if we didn't have that last pit stop, would have been just outside of the top 5.
You fascinate me though, because you're so hard on yourself. Like I don't think you realize the people that you beat as well. If you look at I think Daytona is a really interesting race because it's used as an exercise for a lot of different people. So you're right, it counts towards nothing for anyone. It's just the point of doing a race. And if you look at some of the people that you were racing against, there's a clear reason why they were doing it. So I think Hickey's a really good example. Obviously, getting time on that smaller model bike is extra laps towards something like the Northwestern TT that's coming up in the next couple of months. And it definitely didn't go to plan to him. And also, like, using Daytona is a race you want to do, right? It's a classic race. So for him, I'm sure to some degree it's that I want to do it, and also like it's extra time on the bike as these big events are upcoming. So I think you and PJ had a pretty damn good go of it, to be honest. Like that's not a bad result at all. And if you look at some of the people who didn't finish at all, I'd be
starting far down. I mean, PJ started farther back than me and Corey, but we started I think in 18th or 19th, and able to make my way up quite a bit. And obviously some people DNF'd, but I mean, you gotta be in the race to win it. So
exactly.
Yeah, we did good considering, and then obviously that's 57 long laps of Daytona. So it was honestly on the bike wasn't that big of a deal, but as soon as I stepped off the bike, I was limping back to the pits, and I said it in my post, but got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm just sat here. Ben Spies, he came over. Ben was like, "I'll take off your boots for you." He's taking off my boots in the pits for me, which is pretty funny. I'm sure they got it on camera, so he's gonna probably torture me with that. But yeah, it was really fun. Something that I'm definitely gonna next year. I know the team. Like I already talked to Graham Rahal about it, obviously, and Ben, which I got the chance to go to the IndyCar race in St. Pete the day after, and we have a clear plan of what we're gonna do to make this bike a race-winning bike, of course, and I think we're still getting really close to that, even right now. But yeah, we have things next year in plans to hopefully go out and try to put one of the bikes on the top step.
Good.
I don't know about you, Maddi, but I picture Kayla like walking through the paddock, like eyeing up Peter Hick and be like, "You better keep walking." That's right.
I know I know Hickey well enough. I don't think he'd take it to heart, put it that way. But
I know Kale's giving some of that Pennsylvania intimidation, man.
Hickey's a good dude. He can take it. He enjoys it. Hickey's someone that lives for the competition. It's not just riding the bike. It's everything. You don't get to be who Peter Hickman is without a bit of that. But that's all, like like you were saying, Kay, like Daytona is just one of those things that has to be done. Like I was supposed to be there, I couldn't come for several reasons, but it's one of those things that has to be done. And I think if you're looking at your season ahead, far out, you've got like a long season ahead of you, and that's nothing to be ashamed of with what you've achieved
Yeah.
in, a couple of days on a weekend that essentially counts for nothing. That's pretty cool. In reality, that's a pretty cool thing. So you've done
No, it was
quite
fun.
well.
Sure. I mean, and like you said, it doesn't count. So that's we take it as that test, and we're gonna get another test day before Atlanta, which is rolling right around the corner.
Yeah.
And I think we have a good package. I know we have a good package to start making these bikes, race winning bikes, and yeah, we're really getting. And obviously, I'm racing with PJ, who's World Super Sport runner up 2 years in a row, and then obviously Moto America Superbike race winner. Same with Corey. Corey's Stock 1000 race winner and champion. Like these guys know what they're doing. So racing around them is definitely a huge benefit, and I've already seen kind of those changes in my riding, which needed to happen. So it's been really cool.
Good.
Yeah, it's this team. I mean, to go out there and be like, wow, I have maybe the best bike on the grid. I mean, the manufacturer that if there were a truth serum, every rider in all the three paddocks would say, yeah, I'd want to be on that bike. Except in the case, where they have a competitor that they just want to smash. Everybody would want to be on that bike, whether you're on WSBK or Moto America or MotoGP. And so that's what we aim to bring you this year. We're going to bring you MotoGP coverage, Moto America coverage, and it just so happens that we have one person in each one of those grids every weekend. So, Maddi traveling with MotoGP. She's also you have something going with WSBK. Is that correct, Maddi? What's going on with you and WSBK?
Yeah, so the Women's World Championship this year will start in the World Superbike paddock. So I'm actually taking a big step back from journalism entirely. It's not my forte anymore. And I will be the team principal of Sekhmet Racing in that championship. So that's exciting. And I've actually taken Mallory Dobbs out of the US, and we love the Bagger series. I love the Bagger series. It's good.
Washington's own, yeah.
Yes, I'll be seeing her in a couple of weeks' time. So I've got Mallory, and then I've got Lizzie Whitmore out of the UK, and they are two entirely different people, entirely different backgrounds, and that's what makes them a really great team, and that's exciting to me. Lizzie's only 19 years old. She has ambitions of being a road racer. She wants to race things like the Isle of Man TT and the Northwest 200, Daytona, obviously. Anything that's endurance based is definitely up her alley. Whereas Mallory has a different skill set, but is still so usable in the Women's World Championship on the R7. And I've got a bit of a point to prove in the Women's World Championship for several reasons. I know people say to me, I remember when this championship was released, someone said, oh, well, women can't race MotoGP. And I'm sitting there like, the R7's heavier than a MotoGP bike, doll. Like, come on, you actually can. So there's a lot of purpose to this championship. And I know to some people, they'll say it's not necessary. We already have mixed classes. And yeah, that's great. But this championship is very much about creating pathways and entry to places that don't exist. I think, Kayla, you might understand this yourself in some of the people that you've spoken to and historically you've worked with, as in women in our sport. It's not that it's not welcoming, it's just that little bit harder. And
yeah, of course.
Finding those avenues and getting people to give you the time of day and not be so skeptical for reasons that they have no evidence against, that exists. That does exist. And then you get like a massive talent like Kayla comes along and smashes it. But I have no doubt in my mind that she's had to work incredibly hard to be seen as a racer and not a girl racer. So this championship is all about removing those kind of stereotypes and going, if you care about racing, you don't really care about anything else. That's what you're watching this championship for. And that's what my direction is and my purpose is as team principal at Sekhmet Racing. So exciting times ahead.
Journalism to the back burner.
I'll still write, but it's a different kind of journalism. Now I get to write about things that I care about. And that's exciting. Whereas when you're a full-time MotoGP journalist, you're sort of forced to write about what is news as opposed to what should be important, in my view. And I made a living as a journalist out of writing things that were important. And that didn't always go down well, but it didn't mean that they weren't valuable at the time that they were written. So I'm excited to be able to sort of focus my writing on things that I care about, as opposed to actually having to make a living as a journalist. They're very different jobs.
I don't think I could be more honored to be on pod with two very powerful ladies that are aimed to change racing. I don't think that's too big of a statement to make. So thank you, namaste to both of you guys. Let's start off with get into some MotoGP and Kayla. Man, the first week, the guy who is you let Pedro borrow your number apparently for this season. So let's. I don't know what your storylines are. What struck you about this weekend? Then we'll go to Maddi.
Biggest thing is honestly, I'll kind of go back real quick because I went to the Supercross right before I went to Daytona, and obviously the Daytona Supercross. And the guy I spent the most time with there was Paolo Sabati. So obviously, big guy in Ducati and big guy in obviously all of motorsports. So I had a lot of conversations with him and talked to him briefly about this new Ducati is killer. Like this thing is going to go out and I know it's going to blow away everyone, especially Pecco, and Pecco's going to be really happy with it. And we saw that all through testing. He was able to string laps together, not even just put good laps in and get qualifying times, but also just string laps together and be able to win races. And I knew it was going to happen. And yeah, we see basically a carbon copy of last year, Martin winning the sprint, Pecco winning the race. And, we saw how it went last year. When you look at longevity, Pecco winning races is what he needs. And that Ducati is absolutely fierce right now. And I think he's definitely going to be very, very difficult to stop. I was super happy to see Mark up in top 5 again. He's my hero. So seeing him do well in both the sprint and the race was definitely a cherry on top. And I think he can definitely go out and win races this year. And then obviously with Pedro, like I told you before, DJ, I was setting more realistic expectations for him because I think he has a lot of pressure on him to go out and perform.
Man, nah. That kid feels no pressure. Like I can tell you,
exactly.
I promise you. He walked into the media center, sat down in front of me and went like this, and I was like, "Hey, Maddi." I was like, "Are you all right?" And he goes, "That was wicked, hey." That was like a lot happened in 40 minutes. And I was like, "Jesus, this kid, he feels," because, right, he knows he's not intimidated by being a celebrity. He's not intimidated by being someone. He loves what he does. He's got a beautiful smile. He's talented as hell. Like, there's no doubt about that. Kid feels no pressure. If anything, the people who feel pressure, I think, this year are Jorge Martin, because he'll be potentially without a seat next year at Ducati. That relationship is coming to a close, and that's obvious. Jack Miller is another one now with the introduction of Pedro, who just, showed up, led at the front pack of the race for, majority of the race before he realized his tires were shot, and that's bound to happen. Still finished ahead of him, not on a factory bike. I'd be worried if I was Jack Miller. And, I think people like Mark will feel immense pressure, but Mark's pressure comes from internally. I was speaking to Frankie Carcetti last week, who's Mark's crew chief, and just looking at the data, you can actually see within the data the effect that all of these surgeries and operations on his arm have had through left and right hand turns. You can see that where the difference is. So, I mean, Coda and Saxon Ring are going to be really great for Mark. But it's interesting. I think Pedro's, yeah, I get what you mean. I understand it. But also I don't think he cares. He's out there he's just like,
he's the Spanish Kayla. He doesn't care about pressure.
Well, basically it's like he has all these pressures, right? But like people putting their pressure onto him, saying, feeding him these things. But exactly what you're saying, he's not feeling it. And you can see that in his riding, and you can see that in his confidence. And basically, I knew he was going to be close to the front, but he definitely exceeded my expectations.
Yeah.
And I knew he was a great talent, and everyone knows that. Obviously, you win Moto3 World Championships, Moto2 World Championships. Of course, you're going to be insanely fast at the top. And even talking, about MotoGP bikes, when you think about it, with all of the new aero, the new assist, everything with the bike, it's not that they're easy to ride, but they've become much more manageable to ride.
They make motorcycle riders lazy, is
Yes.
the way I would say it. And Pedro's interesting, right? Because he strikes me as the type of motorcycle rider that you could put on any motorcycle and he'd ride it to hell. And the reason for that is probably, there's a lot of different reasons for it, but I think a lot of it is actually what he finds valuable in sport, how he trains, the kind of racing he watches when he's not MotoGP is not his favorite sport by any means.
Is his favorite.
His favorite athlete is Michael Dunlop, for God's sake. He wants to do a helmet swap with Dunlop. Like, the guy's insane. So he has a very different appreciation of racing, and it's clear when he speaks to us as well, because he gives no craps to give. He's so to the point, he's blunt, he's happy. He says everything that you're not supposed to say, even though you're supposed to say it, in a way that is so unprofessional that it's exactly what racing should be. Because at the end of the day, this is a job and it's a hard job, but it's a job that you're kind of lucky to have. Like, everyone would want this job. Who gets to ride motorcycles for a living? And I think he anticipates that and respects it. But the chat around the media center is, this kid's lived before. Like, he's an old soul.
Yeah.
He's such an old soul. He walks in and you can't help but want to be his friend.
Sure.
In the greatest way. And he brings that spice back that's been missing, and not that kind of spice where it's motorcycle riders abusing journalists for doing their job. It's spice on the track, and we love seeing it because it makes our job so good. It gives us something interesting to write about. Yeah. And
I'm here to win.
That's entertaining.
Yeah, it's good for the sport, and I think that's what sets apart, Marquez and Valle, right? Marquez has always been, obviously opposed from the early years when he had the beef with Valle, but he was able to Valentino was able to basically play the game, and that's what you need to have in this sport.
Valentino was a bit rough. Look, Valentino's a hero, but he was also a manipulative rider as well.
Yes.
In multiple off track. He was actually a bit of a vicious man in what he was able to achieve off track in terms of manipulation of people and their minds and their thoughts, genuinely. The thing about Valle is the time that he entered the sphere of the world, he entered at a time when media and marketing was changing. So if we're thinking the late 90s, what came about in the early 2000s? Thanks to JLo in a green dress, we now have Google Images. So Valentino was actually able to see ahead of the curve in terms of media and becoming renowned throughout the world. He was able to plug into his community around the world, that being an Italian American community, Italian Australian community, people who liked motorcycle racing but didn't see it the way that he did. So he transcends media. Mark, on the other hand, now I think is a really interesting character because he's never been so forthcoming with the media as he is now. And that has a lot to do with the Honda perception of him as well. Honda, being a Japanese factory, they are very straighty 180, for lack of a better phrase. That's how the Japanese operate. And he has always been the company man, the textbook answer. And it's only now in the last sort of couple of months and on the lead up to the sort of launch of the season that he's become a completely new human. I don't think he'd ever actually tell you 12 months ago, he wouldn't tell you how much pain he was really in.
Yeah.
And now he's so open and so okay to say, like, the biggest competition I have is with myself. And then on the weekend at Qatar, he just turned up and he smashed it. And I have no doubt that was hard for him.
So that interview that he did with your husband was, and we're big fans of Simon Patterson on this show. When we broadcast before, we used to have like a Simon's Fireball segment. So I'm kind of like imagining this ball of fire coming by someone's face that Simon threw. And this one, so the zinger he had this week is, he said, quote, Jack Miller will not finish the season. Oh, Kayla's back. I want to make sure you heard that. She said Jack Miller won't finish the season on the factory bike. And I was like, wow.
The thing is, but the thing is, it's what everyone's thinking and no one wants to say it. But the reality is when we look at KTM, historically, how they operate as an organization, what they find value in, what they seek in development, that's not unusual. It's not actually a far throw to say. I think Jack has had, to Jack's credit, honestly, I mean, the last couple of months, I imagine being a new father, traveling between Europe and Australia to see your family, your child, your wife, all of that's very heavy. It's a lot to go through. But at the end of the day, he's still the man getting paid to do the job.
I
When we
love
look
Jack.
at, I
We
love
all do.
Jack, but when we
Everybody
look at
loves Jack.
when we look at Brad, you know, Brad's in a great position. He performs week in, week out. He's in contention for podiums. He's in contention for championships. Jack is not. He's not there. And to be essentially annihilated by a rookie first round of the season when you have over a year of experience on a KTM, it's really hard. That's got to be hard for Jack. And yes, it's a crappy thing to say and nobody likes it. But the reality is, when we look at KTM and we look at how their organization has worked in the past, it wouldn't come as a surprise to anyone.
Kayla?
It's yeah, it's a tough subject, you know, because
It's tough.
within obviously championships, you see it happen. You know, riders break, especially recently, riders breaking contract and riders teams breaking contract and releasing people and moving people. So I wouldn't say that it's not possible, because I know it's possible, but that would just, it would, you know, it's kind of that harshness that we've seen before. And like she said, you know, KTM has been notoriously known for doing stuff like that. So it would be definitely shocking. And I think, you know, like you said, everyone loves Jack, and obviously an incredible rider. But obviously, if he doesn't show this year and early on in this season, we could see something for sure happening. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it.
I think KTM's interested in one thing and one thing only, and that's winning a championship. And you can't blame them for that. They actually do have one of the most competitive bikes on the grid. But at the moment, it
Number 2.
doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way, despite the fact that the second, in layman's terms, the second best bike on the grid. Theoretically, all of those bikes deserve to be in some capacity in a top spot, maybe bar the Yamaha and the Honda at the minute. But nonetheless, they're still prototype bikes. All of those riders are the greatest in the world. They wouldn't be there otherwise. But KTM's only interested in winning a championship. And I think when you look at Pedro and you look at Brad, you look at why they have Danny Pedrosa as a test rider, who, again, turns up. Well, what race was it last year? It was Spain, Catalunya, Jerez. Turned up at Jerez last year. We were all like, he's going to win as a wild card. This kid's going to, he's a kid. He's not a kid. He's a fully grown adult man. He's going to win. He didn't. But again, when we're looking at where our regular riders are in that factory, that's got to be hard. And those decisions are going to be made. And, you know, contracts, they do mean something. And I know that sounds quite funny to say because they seem not to, but contracts have clauses. They have money and guidelines written into them in these scenarios. They have to, because the idea of a contract is that it can't be broken unless it needs to be. You know, that ultimately nobody wants to break a contract, but if a business feels that it's necessary, they will go through the means to do so.
Well, you don't get a name like Pitt as your first name if you're soft. So I mean, anybody named Pitt, and I don't care what his last name is.
But even Pitt Brewer, as a human, as someone to do business with, great man. Honestly,
No,
I've got time
kidding.
for Pitt. And no, I know. But it's business though. At the end of the day, when you're at this level, you can't treat it like a club race. It is a business. There is money involved. There is livelihood, and winning championships is our job.
Yeah.
That's the goal. You know, if we're not winning championships and we're putting everything into our test riders and development only for our on-track riders not to be there, what's the issue? Is it us or them? How do we find a solution? And these are the questions that everyone wrestles with.
They may still pay his paycheck even if they swap bikes. So, you know, obviously, I mean, contractually, they're probably going to pay him. He just won't be riding in the factory colors. But yeah, it's a bold statement. And what I wanted to say about Mark is it was extremely revelatory, the interview that he had with Simon Patterson, your husband, is that it's the first time he showed a certain frailty that you were alluding to that we have not seen before, where he talked about, because Simon asked him that, no, my arm will never be the same. It's not the same. I'm not the same. And that is something that the Robo Mark wouldn't have revealed. And so the notion of him winning the championship here, I don't think is realistic. Even if he improves and is on the podium a lot, I don't think that version of Mark probably exists anymore that will go for it to that level. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see him winning the championship this year. I see him being a top contender. And the other thing that I wanted to get your take on, oh man, it was something, it might have been about Antonio pressuring him if he ends up starting to ride really well. I don't think that was what I had in mind, but just that take right there. I don't see him as somebody that's going to beat the top couple of guys. So what is your take on that? First, you, Kayla, please.
As a fan, I would love to see Mark win another championship. And I honestly think that he has such a raw talent that he can mask so many, I guess, deficits that he has, whether it be the bike, himself. He has such a raw talent and like aggressiveness to where he can just ride through it and do things that a lot of people don't think he can do. But like you said, it would be very, especially in the day we're living in now with, Martin, Bagnaia, or I just said that, Binder, Pedro now coming up. I mean, these are generation talents that are obviously last year they dominated the entire series. So it's hard for me to say that he's going to go out and win another championship, but it's like me with Frankie, Morbidelli. I'd love to see him get close to winning a championship again, or, maybe even win a championship. But it's the same thing where I feel like after especially his knee injuries, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to come back. And obviously now lack of testing and lack of time on that bike definitely are not playing into his favor. But as a fan, I'd love to see him win. And I still have hope that he can make it happen. But, we'll see.
We'll get
Yeah.
We'll get, you know what, we'll get to that, and we'll get to the fact of how Betzeki's feeling about turning that ride down, which he did, which Valentino never would have turned down that 24 package. But Maddi, how do you feel about Mark winning the championship, or just really being more like a top contender along with Digia and some of the other?
I think, when it comes to things like masking how you feel and masking your health and well-being, I think Mark's actually past that, if I'm honest. I don't think he needs to mask how he's feeling emotionally or physically. I actually think it's a massive problem in our paddock that happens. I think it shows that there's not actually a pathway for development. There's not actually a pathway for wildcards to sit in place and do the job, which is hard because, like I said, everybody wants to win a championship. If anything, I think Mark's now kind of the poster boy for if something's wrong, go and get it fixed. Because if you're talented enough to step back into your job, you should be taking care of your body, not ignoring it. On the other hand, if we're looking at people like Digia, Bez, they'll be competitive. They will come round. Qatar is an inevitably tough track for a lot of different reasons, even throughout testing. You spend a lot of the time at testing during the day. Or in the late afternoon. It's not even sunset yet. And then 2 weeks later, the humidity's changed. The weather conditions changed. It started raining on the Saturday, was it? The weekend just gone, or the Friday, whatever. Friday?
Yeah, it was.
Yes,
it was
during sessions.
Friday. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can't race at night because of the reflection of the lights on the water. So there's a lot that goes into that track, and it's actually one of the weird like little micro ecosystems that it just changes rapidly, even though it's in the middle of the desert. But I think we will see Bez and Digia come out and be very, very competitive throughout the season. Digia is actually a gun. Like
Fire.
He's really good. And I think, Morbido, poor bloke, mate. And but if anything, what this shows you is that the Ducati is not actually as good as we all think it is, because it's not a bike you can just sit on and go fast. Because if it was, there would have been a very different result over the weekend. And let's not forget, Morbido was in an accident that he wasn't alive. Alex Marquez essentially brought Morbido back to life.
Yeah.
So he's been through a lot physically recently as well. He will become more competitive throughout the season. He's in a good package now. He's in a very supportive team. We know that Pramac supports their riders. We've seen that. I think the reality is what's more likely to occur, as I said earlier, is Jorge won't have a seat at Pramac or within the Ducati family next year. I know that a lot of people love to say that Anea won't be in the factory seat next year and Jorge will. I have some trouble seeing that because I think Ducati know it's safer to leave Anea in a competitive seat. And Anea at this moment, given the year he had last year, is not actually the biggest threat to Pecco. And Ducati would be happy to keep him in that seat as long as he's not. But that again, this is just the monopoly of the sport. I think it's more likely that Jorge would be departing Pramac and making room for another rider, perhaps. And we'll see that occur at Aprilia towards sort of the end of the year, as well as those 4 contracts come up for renewal, because Aprilia looks after the Trackhouse contracts. So Raul and Miguel actually have those contracts signed with Aprilia, not with the team. Thank God, because the end of last year could have been a disaster. So there's a lot at play here, but I think ultimately Pecco is Mr. Consistent, and that's a good thing. He rides that bike like no one else. He knows how that bike's going to respond wherever he goes. Mark will be competitive throughout the season. He'll win. He'll win a couple of races.
Sure.
We can anticipate that. I think Rins might pull another one out of the bag on a Yamaha. Coda's very forgiving to Rins, so we'll see what happens in a few weeks.
But I can't see him beating a healthy Mark though on that Ducati package, but maybe I'm wrong.
But this is the sport, though. This is the thing. It's so, a lot of people, I think the year before last, we were all getting a bit bored. We were, because it was just, there's no overtaking. And if I'm honest, even in the overtaking that we saw in Qatar, there's not an overtake. They're really gutsy lunges, which are so unsafe, which kind of shows you that we have outdeveloped our tires too quickly to the point where we're going so fast that even the tracks that we're at now are probably not safe. And that's really concerning. So obviously the tires coming back into this conversation and sort of their redevelopment with Michelin. I know Michelin are feeling the heat and the pressure to get that done. So there's a lot happening right now. There's a lot of change. And I think by 2027, that will be an entirely different ecosystem to what it is now.
Well, it can be, but it can't be slower than if WSBK is only 3 seconds behind, you can't make these bikes slower.
Yeah, but the
than
thing
World
is,
Superbike.
You can. The problem is, people love to compare MotoGP and World Superbike, and nobody likes to hear this. But the reality is, MotoGP and World Superbike are different competitions, and they're different levels of athletes. World Superbike go to 12 rounds a year, and that's great. I've had an argument with Laura Spaz about this on Twitter before, trying to tell me that my job isn't hard because I only go to 22 rounds a year. Yes, as do the athletes in MotoGP. So our encompassed world is much greater than World Superbike, which has one international race in terms of continental in Australia. So you could, in theory, slow the motorcycles down. It's not necessarily about the speed. People watch racing because they like racing. And a fundamental part of racing is rubbing. And it's actually what's missing right now. Rubbing's racing. And we don't have a speck of that in MotoGP at the moment.
What do you mean? We saw Mark's tire track on Jorge.
We have gutsy.
Martin's right shoulder last year.
We have gutsy. We have lunging. But a lot of those moves are made out of almost crossing the track. There's nothing that's close in-depth racing. I know we saw a little bit of it at Qatar, but Qatar is actually a track that's designed by riders and made for riding. It was one of the first tracks to be built with motorcycle riders in mind, not cars. So it's Qatar's an interesting track. But these are some of the things that as a company, as an organization, we need to think about, because you could slow the bike down. And yeah, we love to see speed. That's what a prototype bike is. But if we're too fast for the tracks that are designed for this and it's not safe, that's a problem. And, 22 races a year to put your body. This weekend just gone was the first race we've had a full grid since the first race of last year. That's damning.
Yeah. Portimao, we lost Miguel Oliveira, I think, in that one. At least him.
No, and
and
oh
Yeah.
God, what's
Sorry.
Paul Espargaro?
Yeah, Paul Espargaro. That's right. It was a broken jaw.
You right there?
Yeah, my
I'll be the
seat literally just
dissenting.
fell apart, so I was
Did
just like,
the chair break?
it did break. Completely broke that time, but I was able to fix it. It's okay.
There
Good.
you go. And without Dave there, her dad, the mechanic, to get it. But yeah, I'll be the dissenting opinion here. I love the arrow. I love the tech. I say keep it going, and let the teams and the organization figure that out. And I'm not.
I disagree. I think this is where
We
the
can.
FIM
We
needs
can.
disagree.
We
FIM has to come in
absolutely
and say
can.
no more. If it's a motorcycle, they don't even look like motorcycles.
It looks great to me. I love it. So
I
we don't
disagree.
we don't need to all agree on it, and I love it the way it is, and I know they're going to change it. I don't know how they're going to change it. I know what the rumors are, but we'll see. But I absolutely love what I'm seeing, and may it continue. What I was going to ask you guys about the grid is because there was a discussion, Kayla, between I don't want to mention this guy's name because he kind of bags on a certain journalist that I really like. He's a former MotoGP rider, former BSB champ, and about the aliens, and the aliens are referred to as like Vale and Jorge Lorenzo and Danny Pedrosa, and to a degree Mark Marquez, and there was a certain um, aggression that Mark rode with when he came up that was very difficult for a lot of guys to deal with. That type of aggressiveness in every sort of uh, uh, whether it was qualifying or racing. And now I see there are a lot of Mark Marquez's out there. I see a lot of riders who are as aggressive, even if they're not as talented as Mark. So I see the grid as maybe more competitive than when it was, Casey and the rest of those guys. How do you see that?
Um, I've had a conversation with a bunch of different riders, international racers too, just going over kind of where the shift has been because, like you said, Mark brought a whole different. Not that it was completely different because you still look at the era he came into. It's Lorenzo, Valle, Pedrosa, who were all very very competitive with Mark. But you see what he was doing on the bike was a lot different at the time. And we've kind of mutually gone to an agreement where it was, you have these kids that had started coming up and were doing, kart track racing, drills, all these things were we're riding the front very, very hard. And this is something that really since Mark pretty much brought it to that top level. And I feel like he was the first to really bring that. And not saying that the guys before him didn't ride the front hard, but it was completely different. And the way they were riding was a lot different. And you see it now when you have these kids that have started to come up, from Pedro to Pecco to any of these guys, and even kids coming
Jorge.
through Moto3. You look at the way they're riding now, and it's so much more front end oriented that I think he completely changed the game, and the way he rode completely changed the game. And I've had the same conversation, talking about guys before him, how, you look at Wayne Rainey ride, the old tapes. Um, it's so heavy on the rear and making sure that the rear is pointing the bike, which we still obviously do now. But just from not only, let alone riding style, but just it's so hard to explain because I know the feeling and I know what it feels like, and I can kind of like look at it and say, okay, this is what he's doing. But it's so different, and it's so hard to compare the two eras. It's like, I'm huge on music. It's like pre-Nirvana, post-Nirvana. What changed? It's the
Yeah.
same thing. Pre-Mark, post-Mark. And not saying he was the first, but he was the first one to basically, I can pinpoint and say, okay, he started this. And that's how people have ridden since. And that generation basically grew. And obviously now you see like little 4-year-old kids, coming through parking lots, doing crazy drills, not only spinning, but their front wheel is tucked the entire time, and they're learning how to ride like that. And I think it's just the era new era of what things are doing, but and how riders are riding the bikes.
Is there a whole slew of marks out there that are riding with that similar aggression, Maddie?
Um, it's interesting. So because I've worked in MotoGP, I'm very particular about who I call a Marc Marquez. And my general rule of thumb is the difference between MotoGP and BSB is that only one person in MotoGP thinks that they're Valentino Rossi, and only one person in MotoGP thinks they're Marc Marquez. Even if you speak to Pedro, he actually doesn't enjoy being compared to Marc at all.
Sure.
He just doesn't see it that way. But I definitely resonate with exactly what you're saying, Kayla, that there comes a point where someone comes and changes the game. And then suddenly everyone's trying to replay that game, do that game, be that game. I think there's a slew of talent out there. I think how it's developed is what's interesting. And I think, again, if we take KTM as a case study against Honda, you can almost, in the same way, pinpoint where things started to fall apart in the Honda camp. Not only in terms of what was happening on the motorcycle, Mark's health and well-being, his teammate, in terms of their media and marketing as well. How they started to tell this story when it fell apart really didn't play to their strengths, which has actually given an opportunity to someone like KTM to really put their eggs in the basket with Pedro. So you can see how Mark had an effect on it. I saw a photo, a journalist that I'm friends with on Twitter, what's his name? Antonio, posted last week a photo of Mark with Pedro when Pedro was about 7. And I love these kind of photos when they come up because they make you go like, wow. You know, it's the same as the Rossi and Fabio one. And I think
Rossi and Jorge is a great
Rossi
photo.
and Jorge is another one, yeah.
Rossi and Mark is a great photo.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting time right now because if you look at our grid, we've actually got several champions on the grid. We have several world champions across classes, but in the MotoGP class on the grid right now. And it's really interesting to see how that's changed. I mean, with the departure of Suzuki as well, Frankie Carcetti being Joan Mir's crew chief, there was a reason why Joan Mir won that championship in 2020, and it's that consistency is key thing.
Yeah.
And we've seen him leave because of Suzuki's departure. He never would have wanted to leave Suzuki, and seen him struggle at Honda, and now Honda's going through that rebrand and that remodel and that restructure internally as well. So there's plenty of Marks or Mark-esque riders because he's influenced the world of motorcycle riding. There's no doubt about it. But even when Mark started racing in the top class, the aero and the tech wasn't what it is now, and he'll tell you that. You know, he rode the bike like a bike. Now, in a way, you have to be so prepared for the tech and the aero to take over whatever it is you want to do. And a lot of the time, it looks like the rider is fighting the bike as opposed to riding it. So it's a really interesting time.
What I've said to my friends, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to like interject there too, because I think that era when we saw, I think this is a really good example of going too far, is where you had World Superbike riders, Ben Spies, winning world championships to come over into, I think, honestly, the last good era of MotoGP when it comes to that. And he was competitive right away, and that's what it should be. You should
agree.
Very, very talented riders still in World Superbike, which I still believe that Top Rack, Johnny, obviously, you have Bulaga coming in.
Yeah.
All world-class riders that I'm sure if they grew up in the GP paddock with how it is now, they would be fighting for world championship.
Well, even Johnny Ray, I actually, for personal reasons, there's personal reasons, right? But Johnny Ray is actually the textbook example of if you don't do it in MotoGP, how do you do it?
Yep.
He is and I think that there's something that motorcycle riders can actually take from Johnny Ray is that being a world champion and being consistent. And if we're talking about World Superbikes, the amount of races they have, a lot has changed in the last couple of years, and we can pinpoint when things start to struggle. This is COVID. This is a multitude of reasons why it's like it is now. That will change. That will grow. That series will grow out again. But I think Jonathan Ray is a textbook example of if you don't do it in MotoGP, how do you become Jonathan Ray? And he's done a really good job at that. No one can take that away from him. Exactly. He's a talented motorcycle rider who's made a great career out of doing it. Top Rack is another one. we
Yamaha
love.
screwed that up so bad. They screwed that up so bad.
Well, I mean, yes and no, but again, it comes down to the choices you make at the time you make them. You can't predict the future as much as we all pretend that we can, and we'd love to. There's the way that occurred. Him going to BMW is kind of not a bad shout. And if
Well,
we look at
but
Jonathan Ray right now, really wouldn't want to be Jonathan Ray on the Yamaha. But
right,
meanwhile,
but
Beleg is loving it.
yeah, but it didn't help Yamaha to not have him from a standpoint. He went there, he told him, "Okay, this riding position doesn't work for me, so, when I come back next year," and he went back and the riding position was the same. So he couldn't perform when he did that test the second
And
year.
that
So that's what
doesn't just reach to him, that reaches to his crew chief too, who has gone with him to BMW. So, again, this comes back to what I was saying before about the way that Japanese factories operate. It takes a long time to change habits with some factories. And I think Yamaha and Honda are making strides, right? They're actually really changing their approach. Yamaha are trying, and it takes time. And that's another example of it, really. But to your point, Kayla, like, yes, I completely agree with you on that. There's no doubt that they're world-class riders. But the technology between the two has diverged so much, which is not a bad thing for the sports themselves. That's actually really good for the sports themselves, because the last thing we want is we actually want to see a departure from MotoGP riders going to race World Superbike when they leave MotoGP, because it devalues World Superbike as well. World Superbike is its own unique sport. MotoGP is its own unique sport, and they need to be treated as such. So when you kind of intermerge the ecosystems, it devalues one over the other, because you don't see anyone come from World Superbike to MotoGP, which you would think is the more logical way to do it. If we're talking in sort of super sport classes and going upwards, that's what you'd
I'd
want
rather
to see.
that happen.
Yeah,
the problem
when
is there's not enough seats. That's the problem.
Yeah,
really.
when I look at it from my perspective, also with someone, you grow up in America, you have, unless you are fully pushed into the European style of racing, which is predominantly GP style bikes, you really don't have a lot of opportunities to go over there. And obviously, you're on production based bikes. All of Moto America's production based. Even the baggers is getting closer to prototype bikes, and that's the closest thing we have to anything that way. But I want it to be similar to when we see Colin Edwards and obviously Ben and Melandri, all of these guys that were able to come through, not just to say through Superbike into GP, but be able to make that transition really easily.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of having these bikes, like you were saying, it's getting ridiculous. It's the way, I've had many conversations, obviously, with Ben now, because of course, being my team principal, we talk all the time. And I've questioned him about these things. I'm like, these bikes are a lot different than they used to be, and he's one of the biggest, I guess, advocators for the same thing, slowing these bikes down, making sure, it's getting to the point where it's very dangerous for the riders, but at the same time, it's not really a motorcycle anymore. And, but, also having conversations with him, he was one of the guys that kind of pushed Top Rack to stay in World Superbike, because, he made that transition from GP, or from Superbike to GP. And he said in all of the, I think it was 3 or 4 years that he was in GP, there were only 2 days that he was actually comfortable on the bike.
Yeah.
And that was it. There were every other day he felt like he was about to crash, and the thing was way too stiff, not great. Obviously growing up on production bikes as well, he did not have a great time on that thing.
It's like Bobier. Bobier's
And
experience.
when you look at Top Rack, he had very similar issues, and he looked at it like Johnny Ray. If you build a big name and just a legendary status in this sport, you're better off staying in World Superbike, winning multiple world championships, going that route.
Exactly.
But like you were saying, I think if we make MotoGP, because also with DJ, where do you see these bikes going in the next few years? How far can
Let
we
me
push
can
things?
I let me restate my position, because I don't think I've made it very clear, and that's on me. I do think that it should be safe. Like when I look at Le Mans, I think it's extremely dangerous with these bikes. The track is not built for the speed of the bike. So I'm not saying that the bikes shouldn't be slowed down, but in terms of like aero and ride height devices and innovations, let me make this defense of Ducati. If I'm competing against a guy, I have, let's call him an alien, in Marc Marquez that's out there, and he's winning championships. And I don't have aero on the bike. I don't have these ride height devices and innovations, and he wins. So I say, well, guess what? I can engineer my bike in such a way that you can't outride the innovation that I've made. And that's what they've done. I don't have to have a rider that's better than Marquez, because Ducati, let me finish what I'm saying. I, as Ducati, am not interested in going out there and saying, let's see who the best rider is. That's not my goal. My goal is to produce the best bike that wins the most races, whomever is on that bike. And that's what they've done. Now it's forced everybody to compete with them. Now, has it gotten too fast and dangerous? Yes. Should that be legislated out of it? Absolutely. But their goal is not to determine who the best rider is. Their goal is to win championships with whatever rider, even if you have the better rider, and they've achieved that.
No, that's not their goal.
That is their goal.
That's not their goal. Their goal
That
is
is their goal.
No,
to
their
win
goal is
championships.
to own. Yeah, their goal is to win the
Their goal is
championship.
to win
But it's not to
championships.
do it with just any rider.
It
And
doesn't
the
matter.
thing-
But they don't
it
have to have the best
does.
rider. That's the point.
But the thing is, right, what you're neglecting to remember is Ducati over the last 10 years has also spent $1 billion in infrastructure in MotoGP. €1 billion in infrastructure. Not for 2 factory bikes and 2 satellite bikes, but for 8 of them.
8 bikes, right?
Yeah. So if you're going to talk about engineering a bike, you also got to remember they engineered a marketing strategy and an entire ownership of the grid. So the one person who could win on the bike is their number 1 factory rider. Do you
there's
honestly?
more people that think
No.
it could win.
No.
You don't think so? You
The
don't think Jorge
worst
could win?
thing, the worst thing that could have happened if Jorge won on a satellite bike last year,
They would've
Ducati
hated
would
that.
have
hated
lost
that.
their crap.
No
Telling you
doubt.
now. The
I'm
idea
100% with you.
it's so anyone can win is very far removed. It's so Pecco can win.
No, the
And it's
point
like
is
when
that they don't have to have the best rider necessarily.
But they do.
They have the
Because
best
Pecco
bike.
is the best rider.
No
But
matter
you could put.
no matter how good your rider is, you can't
No,
be
I disagree
Mark
with
in
you.
his prime. Well, it's proven out. It's been
But
proven,
it's not
so.
proven out because
It sure
Mark
was.
hasn't won on the Ducati yet.
Well, but
Has
he's
Mark-
not the
it's-
best
if
rider,
Mark's-
and he's not.
But who's the best
20
rider then?
He's not 2013. Well,
Who's
it
the
could be
best rider?
Fabio.
It's not
Could be
Fabio.
Fabio.
If it
Could
was
be.
Fabio, he'd be winning on the Yamaha like he did in 2020,
Well,
2019.
he can't, because Ducati's a much better package.
So
as
who's
he
the best
stated.
rider?
We don't know, but it could be
Pecco,
Fabio.
because he's 2 years in a row world champion.
Well, in my book, maybe he's the best, but you could have put another
I
rider
love,
on that bike.
I love
and
Kayla
they
watching
would've
this
won.
right now. She's just like,
Yeah.
I think she's on my side, actually, believe it or not. But anyway,
I don't care if she's on your side or not. I'm entitled to my opinion.
of course you
So,
are. But I don't think,
yeah.
I think to some degree it's not as black and white as that. I think, yes, all the aero and the tech is great, but you're almost saying that any rider could ride it and win, which,
That's
as we
not
know,
what
is
I
not
s-
the
that's-
case.
That's not what I said.
But
though.
it can,
I said
it
that
can
their
imply
goal
that.
is even if you have the better rider, they have the better bike, and that's what they've proven, because multiple people have won races on that bike.
Yeah.
So you've had everybody from Enea to Jorge, Marco, Digia. All these people have won on that bike, so they've proven that their package is better than your package. Their goal is not to see who
Yeah.
the best rider is.
And if you have 8 bikes on the grid, that's more likely to happen.
100%. You have much more data. You have much
So
more.
that
everything.
doesn't that doesn't actually mean that the bike is better. That just means that with all the aero that they have, if you get a better start and a
It
better
is.
qualifying in the top 8, which is more
Objectively,
likely
it's-
to happen with more
Right.
of the same, that doesn't mean
But-
it's a better bike. It just means you own more of the space on the grid.
It wins more races. How about that?
Yeah, no, I don't. It does, but it's because it
if you
owns more
equate to the
space.
better bike, then go ahead,
It's
Kayla.
not the better bike.
Sure, it is.
This is
Obviously.
It's a hard place to interject, because honestly, this we know. I think everyone knows, and Maddi will agree, that this Ducati is obviously one of the best bikes in the grid. But
Absolutely.
when you look at it, like everyone knows that, and everyone knows that this bike is a winnable bike. But you have to look at it as factory has GP24s. Everyone else has GP23s, and I know just from my limited time in being in the Ducati family that they want factory Ducati riders winning the championship every year. And they're going to do everything it takes to get them there. And if that means hiring Marc Marquez to get off of his Ducati to help bring the Ducati in the Constructors' Championship up, or not even just that, but also to help Bagnaia put that gap. Because if you have, obviously, we all know this, if you have Marc Marquez in between Pecco and Fabio, that's a gap. That is multiple points that they're losing every single weekend. Yamaha is losing every single weekend to Ducati. And I think that's where it comes in is they've hired these guys, the fastest riders in the world, to help Pecco win. And I completely see that. And obviously, we've seen other people win, and they want that. They want other people to win. They want other people to be competitive. But it's like a racer. It's like me. I want my teammates to win and be competitive behind me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's how they
exactly.
always, and they want the factory bikes to be there, to be up front, but they want everyone else behind them. And I think that's how people have to see it,
Yeah.
And honestly, like, their structure is so smart. It's not just being the best. It's they have done this and they have curated this over the last. This is something that's been in place and been in the works for a very long time.
€1 billion, guys.
Yeah.
1 billion. That's more than anyone's ever put into MotoGP ever, aside from Michelin, who is like the one that puts the money in MotoGP. It's a lot to own. Ownership is everything. And there's a reason why. It's like chess protecting the queen. That's all it
That's
is.
why we see so many Ducatis on the grid, is because this is something that has been in the works for a very, very long time. And, when you look at Yamaha, Suzuki, these guys that have one team, one factory team now, and Honda, one factory team now, Aprilia is getting better. Same with KTM with Gas, right? These bikes honestly are very, very good. But like she was saying, you have talents that are coming up that can start to be competitive. And I honestly will see, if we see Pedro on the podium this year, I wouldn't doubt he gets a Ducati contract.
Portimao, for sure. For sure.
Like, I'm sure he's getting a Ducati
Wow.
contract. And someone's going to start going in
Bring
here.
that fire.
But I don't think he will, I don't think it's going to be that straightforward, because I get what you're saying. But again, it's the same thing. You keep your Anea was a massive threat to Pecco, which is fundamentally why they put him on the factory team. Because you know that phrase, you keep your friends close and you keep your enemies closer? That's fundamentally why they signed him. And it's also why... but that's not the issue. No. Jack was a factory Ducati rider.
Yeah.
He's Aussie. He's part Kiwi. Doesn't... being your story is nice, but it's not the main issue.
But I think more than factory right now. Like, obviously, for Pedro, I see like going into a Primax seat, or
I think he'll get the KTM seat. He'll just get offered because he's also going to be paid. This is the other thing, right? The payment structure at Ducati is not great. If you're a MotoGP rider, it's really not good. In fact, the one who broke the model was Stoner, because he came in and won everything, and they were like, "Crap, our racing budget's gone through the roof." So the way that Ducati works is you get paid really well if you win races. You get really good win bonuses, but you don't get a very good salary. So it's kind of like a commission-based job. Whereas Pedro will be in for things like win bonuses and a really good salary, as will Brad, as is, I have no doubt, Jack and Augusto as well. I mean, Gas is in an interesting position, being what is essentially a team of two rookies. And if I was Augusto, I'd also be a little bit worried at the moment. Genuinely, I don't think that's an overstatement, because, again, we know how this factory works. And if it's going to help them get to their goal quicker, then they'll do it. And Yamaha, I think Yamaha next year will be in a different position. 2027, we'll see that factory change a lot. They need to put more in their racing budget, and that starts with a factory and a satellite agreement in some capacity as well. Which is why people like KTM fought so hard for grid spots this year and still didn't get them. We still have 2 blank grid spots on the grid.
That ticked me off that they didn't get those 2 grid spots.
No, makes perfect sense. It makes I would have loved to see it, but it makes perfect sense.
Maddi's going to disagree with everything I say today.
Yeah, but I know what I know and I see what I see. But I mean, it makes perfect sense because the last thing you want is to lose the J class. J class is important. And if people don't see that, then they don't see it as a global sport. If you really wanted a European only world championship, it could just be the Ducati World Championship sponsored by Spain.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I don't know. I hope Suzuki, but I don't know who's going to come in. Is there rumors
Yamaha.
that BMW is going to come in? Or
BMW, there's a BMW for sure. I have no doubt about it. Also, it makes perfect sense. But there will be some restructure in terms of the amount of factories we have on the grid right now. So I have no doubt Yamaha will either have a single satellite or a double satellite bike. And we've seen Dorna move away from that model of having singles. You know, if we think back to people like Tito Rabat had a single Ducati that he was racing for years. Karel Abrahams is another example of things like that. So we've seen them move away from that model, but if it's for the betterment of the sport, we might see a return to it in some capacity. BMW entering MotoGP just makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a class of a bike that's not a Kawasaki, it's not a Yamaha. It is I would say one of the most competitive to Ducati in terms of its prestige. But that'll happen in 2027 when the rules change, because there's no point in doing it now to develop a bike that's going to be out of date in 2 years' time.
Yeah, that would be a lot of money wasted. Before we go with this, we still want to get a Moto America preview by Kayla just to set up the grid, because Moto America, sometimes it's not clear what teams, where people have moved, who's competing where, but I know that Kayla knows all of this. So can you at least give us the Superbike, Super Sport grid and anything else that you feel is important before we close the show?
Well, there have been a lot of changes, especially this past year. And I think a lot of it is people are almost not happy with the way the Superbike class is, and I don't blame. And we don't really have factory teams anymore. And honestly, I would be confident saying that the group that I'm with right now is probably the closest to factory. And same with Warhorse is the closest to factory that we've seen in the last 5 years. And we're running a super sport program, and previously they were running a single bike Superbike program. So when you look at who's competing and who's at the top of Superbike class, you have Attack every single weekend. We all know that Gagne is a beast. Same with Patterson, who is also injured. But they also have such a solid program that it's almost unbeatable. And we saw, obviously, Heron coming in on the Warhorse bike, where obviously they're getting data from World Superbike, which has been a huge help for them. But also our tracks are a lot different, so it's been very difficult for them to kind of move that bike into what it needs to be. But I think they're going to make that step this year. And obviously with Loris Baz coming back, he's going to be for sure a championship contender if he stays out of trouble and hopefully doesn't make as many mistakes as he did the last few years. But that's really it. Honestly, West B is out, and that was a big, that was almost like the satellite Yamaha team, if we're going to go that way. They didn't have the same resources. They didn't have the same thing as much as people said they did. They didn't, which is very unfortunate, because I really do think Skoltz was an insane talent and could have won Superbike championships here. But we all know kind of now that he's moving to Super Sport along with PJ, Corey, supposedly maybe some other people. But
They're so secretive. It's like national security with
Yeah.
Moto America, who's moving where. Like you don't know till the opening day.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much. Honestly, they keep. I wish they didn't do that. I wish they kind of did things. You know, when you see World Superbike, they hint at things throughout the season. At the end of the season last year, I wish they started hinting at Ray Hall, especially coming in. I had no idea until basically Ben was like, "Well, maybe we're gonna have a team, and maybe you're gonna be a ride." I'm like, "You, you didn't tell me before, but okay." But no, like having those things makes it very interesting. Like saying these teams are about to come in, and these are seats that are filled. We don't really have that. We don't have that excitement. But obviously now we have Titler's coming back, which a lot of people were skeptical if they were going to leave or not. I knew they weren't going to leave because fortunately I got to spend some time with them at the end of last year on the Super Sport bike and with Bobier and JD Beach, which is a very safe option. I think I know Michael Kiley, and he's a great guy, and he wants to win races, and he has two guys that he knows can go out and win races. But I'd also like to see some younger guys come in. You know, you have such good talent in not only super sport, but I know there are people that want to be in the Moto America paddock in one level or another. And I wish some younger guys would get those opportunities. But we kind of see that with M4. I mean, M4 has made that step, but the Suzuki needs to be a little bit more competitive. You know, Brandon Posh, who I know pretty well, you know, he's a dog. That's what he says, you know, and he's going to put everything out there to try to go out and win. But honestly, I think that's up to the Suzuki. And I think we see that with Richie Escalante because, again, another guy that I know can go out and win a Superbike World Championship or Superbike Championship, you know, in Moto America. But right now I feel like the M4 bike really needs to get developed. And from what I heard, it could be a lot better this year, but they say that every year. So everyone says that every year, but we'll see. But yeah, Super Sport seems like the class, honestly. You know, when we look at it and we look at just the Daytona 200, so many people were interested in coming over, and I think they saw the entry list and got a lot of motivation to start coming out and maybe participating in Moto America and Moto America Super Sport. And seeing the fans this past weekend, it was pretty crazy. Like I have, you know, the Daytona 200 has been its own thing. You know, people come, people don't, you know, it's whatever. And a lot of people don't really know that it's going on because it's at the end of bike week and, you know, the Supercross was just the week before. But there were a lot of people there. There were a lot more than I have probably ever seen at the Daytona 200. And I think it was that hype. And that's what we need. We need more of that. We need Moto America to keep pushing out these entry lists of 15 people that we think can win the Daytona 200. We need to do that. Like 15 people that we know can win in Moto America. And I looked at the entry list, obviously, for the full season so far. And there are still 15 people that have been on podiums, won races in multiple classes. And it's stacked. I mean, world-class riders, superbike riders that have all made that step down, unfortunately, because obviously our superbike class is kind of, I wouldn't say struggling at the moment, but it kind of is. And it's going to be the class this year is Super Sport. And I hope that's not a gateway into baggers. I hope that's a gateway to bike or
far out.
But yeah, I mean, these guys are making moves, and we look at the series from a wide standpoint. I think we need to start putting more money into Superbike and getting more teams back into Superbike. And I think that's going to come with the talent that's in Super Sport. And I think people are going to start paying attention, and we're going to start getting those factories back.
So wherever Kayla goes, that's the class to be in. Obviously, she went to Super Sport. Maddi, before we go to parting shots, how's Ginger the donkey? Can you give us an update on Ginger?
She's so good. She's so spoiled. I just love that I have a pet donkey. Like of all pets to have a pet donkey. She's cute. She's happy. She's eating grass and, you know, chasing me around. So she's happy. She's good. My mother-in-law bought me this cup over the weekend that says "Beware, crazy donkey lady." So very fitting.
I was going to ask you if you can make a JPEG of Ginger. I'll have my artist guy make
No,
a
I don't
sort of-
think I don't think that's necessary. It's okay. She doesn't want to be famous. She's told me
Okay.
she's very
Oh.
shy. She's camera shy. Let's not.
I would love to. I love that donkey. I would love to have her as somehow a logo that we can put up on our like where it says Full Throttle.
I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do.
If you haven't seen her, Kayla, she's so adorable, man. This donkey.
I'll
So,
send you a video. She is pretty cute.
Please do.
That's great.
All right, parting shots with Maddi. What do you got?
What have I got about what? What do you want to know?
Well, it's just parting shots to say, saying goodbye to the audience.
Oh.
Anything final you want to say about what's upcoming? Anything?
Just keep an eye on Portimao. I think it's going to be a very interesting race. And the way that Portimao usually goes, I feel like we're going to have some conversation about the stones and how big they are and how they're stuck together because the track has been homologated despite the fact that the track hasn't been cleaned yet. But I don't know. I'm not a journalist anymore. I just go to the races. So let's see what happens. But
wow.
I do expect that to be the case at Portimao. Why we go there with MotoGP, I know the answer. I won't say it, but it does annoy me that we do because we're too fast for that track and it's not fit for purpose, not for MotoGP. World Superbike, maybe. Well, MotoGP, maybe not. But I imagine Thursday's press conference or Friday's press conference, there'll be some questions about track safety, as is always the case with Portimao.
Get rid of it.
I love that track. Don't get rid of it.
Too. I love that track
it's a great track. It's a great track. But for MotoGP, it's so... I can't wait to go there with Superbike. Mallory was telling me, she's like, I can't wait to do the jump. I'm so excited for Portimao. And I'm like, oh, God.
Just tell her already. It's not possible on a little bike. I've tried. It's not possible, but if she
I love Portimao too, but yeah, if it's unsafe, that's another ballgame.
She might be able to get like an inch, but
she'll be all right. I reckon she can do it. I'm excited to see her try it.
Parting shots, Kayla.
Yeah, we test in a few weeks. Atlanta's a few weeks away, so eyes on Atlanta. Try to get things sorted there, and honestly, we're looking for Barber long term. That's my favorite round.
Your favorite?
That's like my favorite track in America, of course.
I might see you there.
I'll be there. Hopefully,
that's the plan
for us. I mean, I don't want to jinx anything, but every time I've been to Barber, I've gotten onto the podium. So that's the only track I've had that happen. So we're gonna keep that on the low. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. And yeah, I'm looking forward to. Obviously, I'm an avid motorcycle racer, but also a fan. So
enthusiast.
We'll see how everything starts to sort out in the next few weeks with MotoGP and World Superbike.
Good.
Yeah, I expect to see. I'll be at Atlanta, and I expect to see you guys at Barber. I'll be there as well in Coda.
I'll see you at Coda.
Yeah, and I love Barber too. Although my track day there had left something to be desired when I ran into another rider who was inside of me. But anyway, where can everybody find you on social media? Please, starting with Maddi real quick.
Just at Maddi Paddy, MADDI_PADDY. Maddi Paddy, the one and only.
Same in Instagram?
Yep, across the board.
The team principal of Sekhmet Racing International. And Kayla, where can they find you?
I got Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. It's basically all of it. And it's all just my name, Kayla Yaakov, KaylaYaakov. On TikTok, it's Kayla Yaakov31. So that's it.
Love it. Thank you very much. You can see mine right on the screen there at DJ at call_all_beings. Thank you so much for tuning into this premiere episode. We expect to see you after Portimao. If we can sync these schedules together like the clutch and the transmission. This is DJ for Maddi Patterson and Yaakov. This is DJ saying peace out. One love. We'll see you down the road. And we always wonder what's up around the bend.